Welcome everybody to the second plenary talk for the conference. So I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Stephanie Mines to share with us. For those of you that were here the first morning, she was on the Buddhist counseling panel. But I also wanted to give everybody the chance to hear more from Stephanie about her work as a neuropsychologist and what I would call a wisdom practitioner that has done a lot of work around somatic healing of trauma and understanding what trauma is, and also what shock is and the difference between trauma and shock. And so she has countless number of hours working with individuals, groups, families, engaged in healing and transformation work. And she's also part of what's called Climate Change and Consciousness, which is a large international network of communities that are focused on healing. And I see it as helping people make an evolutionary step into a new world, a new, where it's a birth moment that we're being collectively called to be reborn into some new way of being. And so she's a vision holder for that, that international effort. And then we're also lucky to have Alane Daugherty with us, who will be responding to Stephanie. Alane is working with me and Lourdes and some other folks. We have a project of wanting to develop a contemplative care worker cooperative in Southern California, in Claremont area. And so Alane's a former student of Lourdes, and so we were talking about this contemplative care worker cooperative, and Alane was sharing more about her work, and I was like, oh, like I have to get her and Stephanie together.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm a student of Alane's.
Exactly, there we go. So I felt in my body that, oh, the two of Alane and Stephanie need to talk to each other. I don't have the full conceptual reasons why, I just feel it in my body that, oh, they should talk. And yeah, so without further ado, we will let Stephanie give her presentation.
Thank you, John. Let's begin with a somatic attunement. So I'd like to invite everybody, whether you're seated or standing, to put your awareness in the soles of your feet. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can. And direct your attention to the connective tissue, the very skin of the soles of your feet. And let's just breathe into the soles of our feet initially. So allow your breath to deepen of its own accord. And make the contact with the surface that your feet are resting on very deliberate, very connected. And let that contact deepen beneath that surface into the flesh of the earth, the very texture, the soil, the connective tissue of the earth. And just allow that to happen. Again, let your breath help you. Soften your knees, all your joints. You can slightly tilt your pelvis. You can roll your shoulders, removing any tension from the time you may have spent in front of your computer today. Wave those shoulders around, let them wave at each other. Let your chest widen, let your face soften, and allow your fingertips to orient in the same direction as the soles of your feet towards the body of the mother, and feel her communication with you through the soles of your feet and your fingertips. Breath. Now I want you to imagine that you are in the center of an oval of energy that moves up the back of your body and down the front of your body. And the point of initiation for that upward movement is at the base of your big toes. So just bring your attention. Don't worry about precision here. Bring your attention to the field right under the big toes, right where that crease is, and the big toes hook into the rest of the foot. Just allow your attention to go to both sides, right there, under the big toe. That's the point of initiation. That is called victory. And the victory is the movement of the ascending and descending energy. At that point, under the big toe, the movement ascends, the movement of energy, the movement of your chi, the movement of your prana, the movement of your life force, the movement of your aligned energy begins its upward journey up the back of your body bilaterally, ascending both legs right through the middle of the calves of your legs into your sit bones. That site is called quietly regenerating. So as energy moves up into your sit bones on the right and left sides, you're already regenerating, quietly restoring. And that upwardly moving pathway bilaterally continues its journey. You can use the sit bones as the ruler to mark that ascending path all the way up to the lateral lobes of your occiput, the base of your cranium. Feel it. Notice how powerful your attention is as that energy ascends into these sites on the lateral lobes of your occiput. That site is called shamanic gateway. That energy that you have ascended through your consciousness is now entering your cranium. Feel it. Moving to the crown of your head. Where it is about to cascade bilaterally down the front of your body. And I am going to direct you to holding two sites that will support that waterfall of embodied descending energy. So bring the palm of your right hand to the base of your lower ribs, right on that floating rib. So this level, the floating rib, let the palm of your hand rest there, and the palm of the other hand is going to come over to the bend of the elbow, and your fingertips will nuzzle into that crease right at the lateral aspect of the bend of the elbow. These two sites are going to support the waterfall of descending energy that is now going to cascade from the crown of your head bilaterally through your forehead, right in that region above the arch of your eyebrows. There's a sacred site called Genius. And the waterfall descends from there. You're pulling it vigorously, robustly with these sites that you're holding. And if you look at photos of the Dalai Lama, you will frequently see him holding these two positions. One is called the sustainer. The other one is called boundaries. Filtering and protecting so that your alignment is assured. And feel that descent in these bilateral waterfall flows down the front of your body, down through your cheekbones, down through your jaws, down through your collarbones, your chest, being pulled by this wonderful filtering positioning that assures that you are nourished and that all toxins are pushed out, unnecessary. You receive only the nourishment, and that energy descends, continuing down the front of your body, down through the inguinal areas, right and left, through the middle of the thighs, the kneecaps, the lower legs, with the destination being to that site again, underneath the big toe, where the cycle endlessly continues, descending to ascend, ascending to descend, as above, so below. Let's breathe in to that experience that will continue even after we remove our hands. And after 3 wonderful breaths, I'm going to invite you to bring the palms of your hands together at the heart level, pressing the pads of the fingers to one another, pressing the palms of the hands together. This is an Inju or mudra. In the tradition I received from my teacher, the word is Inju. This is the Inju of alignment. It initiates the main central vertical flow, the central channel that descends to ascend and ascends to descend. Breathing into this, integrating your experience. And then gracefully moving out of that luscious contact, letting your fingertips again orient towards Mother, retaining the softness in your joints, feeling the shifts in your body, attending to the reorganization that you claim. If you feel the pulsation through your hands into your wrists and your arms, as I do, please join me in expressing gratitude for that sensory experience, that activation. of compassion. And you can stay in this absorption as long as you like. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to John for inviting me. And I want to honor the trajectory of my relationship with John and how it's bearing fruit right now. It's luscious. It's a moment to savor. I savor it. I also do want to bow to all my teachers from various traditions and lineages, some of whom are now my treasured ancestors, whose blessings nourish me. And in particular, in this context, I recognize Trungpa Rinpoche, who is thankfully still in the body, and who entrusted me with both Tara and Medicine Buddha empowerments, and whose Yidam is Tara. Rinpoche also blessed me with the life-changing Chenrezig retreat and empowerment that is a foundational imprint for my embodied purpose in life. It illuminated everything on my path and the path itself. I have multiple objectives in this presentation, but I intend, and hopefully I'll succeed, at weaving them all into a coherent and stimulating rally for both sacred activism and unprecedented leadership. I want to define what I mean by those terms and use the examples of feminine leadership for both, as well as igniting in everyone a sense of robust, pointed urgency and alertness to how we are exquisitely poised right now as a global community. We are in the middle of the welcome disintegration of social and economic structures that are long overdue in their dissolution and which have clearly been dissolving for quite some time behind the horrifying masks of progress, colonialism, and genocide. We are actually in what is, from the perspective of women, indigenous peoples, and the creatures of the earth, we are in a post-apocalyptic era, and we are on the brink, perhaps in the midst of already the rise of the New World from the marginal territories of the survivors. I speak as a survivor. I speak as someone in whose veins flow the blood of the lost ones, the disappeared. And I speak as someone who knows what it means to carry a fragmented, broken nervous system in her body, and as she who has restored that nervous system with enormous devotion. In this time of this talk and our experience together, I would also like to speak to the responsibilities as I see them of Buddhist caregivers and indeed all those privileged to call themselves counselors, caregivers, therapists in this post-apocalyptic period in the climate changing world with enormous health challenges that will only increase and accelerate, and that will take hold, as they already have been for some time, vociferously on the most vulnerable who we are bound to protect. I speak of sacred activism as a woman who has engaged in and witnessed activism that was not sacred. I speak from the history of radical and violent political activism and the torturous consequences of that involvement that I knew both from the police, the authorities, and from within the movement itself. Knowing its opposite in my body, I come to a definition of sacred activism, having earned its understanding. Sacred activism is directed by clear spiritual guidance that is identified and communicated somatically. This is the sacred activism that created climate change and consciousness. Climate change and consciousness was initiated by a directive that arrived in my body on November 8th, 2016. It played out quite precisely, proving its validity. First, in a momentous gathering a year and a half ago that ignited a commitment for more than 500 people to be voices for our living Earth. It continues as a global movement to fuel inner climate transformation and support Indigenous initiatives on 3 continents. Originally led by people like Vandana Shiva, Shutekat Martinez, Uncle Anganak, Bill McKibben, Charles Eisenstein, and Christiana Figueres, amongst others, climate change and consciousness has evolved into collective leadership, which is, as Thich Nhat Hanh has indicated, the way the Buddha arrives now. I would like to speak specifically to the somatic aspect of sacred activism. As a neuroscientist who has served severely traumatized and shocked people and communities for more than 3 decades, I am acutely aware of the physiological ramifications of overwhelming stress. What I want to point out is how the body repairs itself when the appropriate interventions are introduced. This repair, which we call resilience, is the biological intent of innate, indeed DNA resilience. The subtle energy medicine I incorporate into the Tara approach arises from Taoism and is nature-based. It promotes not only healing. Resilience goes beyond healing. This intervention prompts, signals, and neurologically turns on evolutionary potential. That is what true resilience is. It is beyond what we think of as repair or recovery. And please be clear, this biological imperative for resilience is everyone's birthright. It is available to everyone, no matter how many hours they've sat in meditation, no matter what practices they've done. It is everyone's birthright. I define and I personally experience evolution as the capacity to meet the unknown with surprising innovation and a surprising competence that is based not on me, but on my alignment with the natural world. To give insight into this definition of evolution, I want to share some personal experiences that came from receiving the somatic guidance to be the vision holder of climate change and consciousness. From virtually that day forward, I was blessed to receive communication from nature in surprising and stirring ways that continue to be undeniable and humbling. It was as if a veil was lifted from my eyes and I was allowed into the inner kingdom of plant communication, of the interplay of leaf and light. This was, as the original guidance was, utterly and completely sensory. And I say that as a student of sensory systems. It's one of the areas of my clinical research is into sensory integration. So I was introduced to sensory experiences that I never anticipated or planned for. And the only causative I could determine was that I had received this guidance for climate change and consciousness. The sensory component expanded into alterations in hearing, as if someone had placed an implant in my ears so that I could understand the language of the birds. Like cochlear implants. If you've ever seen a child who's received a cochlear implant and the way that they look when they hear for the first time, that was my experience. These were sounds I didn't know existed. The guidance and my incapacity to refuse it, that in itself, the guidance in itself and my incapacity to refuse it, you can hear in that if I could have, I might have, but my incapacity to refuse it became the source of the evolution. If I try to understand how this happened, I can look back at the healing of my nervous system that may have laid the groundwork for this. Being a neuroscientist, I'm acutely aware of the mind-body interplay and how shifts in the nervous system sequence new neurochemical interactions. Understanding in particular the way the somatosensory cortex, the motoric driver of behavior, reorganizes as a result of new synaptic firings, I could feel that happening. I could feel those delicate repatterned movements that brought me into direct relationship to the non-human realms. This continues to orient me and is my primary sanctuary. The innate kinship between the feminine as the carrier of life and the forest, the natural world, the world of sensory intelligence, is one of the reasons why women have been identified by Project Drawdown as uniquely capable of making the difference to the future of the planet if we are empowered and heard, if young women are educated, if women lead in decision-making, if women make critical choices for families, for countries, for organizations. Then Drawdown estimates that we globally are more likely to draw down carbon, to come to the zero carbon status that will save us from annihilating ourselves. This is why I have been led to empowering women as an expression of climate activism. This is why I prioritize supporting women in removing the obstacles to their leadership and paving the way for them to fulfill their entelechy or soul purpose, their original brilliance as leaders as soon as possible. This is an example of the union of sacred activism and unprecedented leadership. Let me come now to the definition of unprecedented leadership. This is leadership that does not resemble anything you would learn in a leadership training. This is leadership that is unique to each individual. This is authentic leadership, entelechy speaking for itself. It is the organic flow of liberated consciousness. It is the voice of interbeing, speaking directly to each individual. Here, I would like to reference Joanna Macy, who embodies both sacred activism and unprecedented leadership. Her fusion of systems thinking, Buddhism, and expressive therapies demonstrates everything I am speaking of here. And what is revelatory is her writing about how she received these directives to create these incredible programs that are now taught throughout the world. The Truth Mandala, for instance. How did these come to be? They came to her in the night. They came to her in the moment that I describe reading about them as experience. Joanna demonstrates that sacred activism is rooted in unity and connectedness. And while she was coming from Buddhist teachings, she was also following her woman's heartbreak and making an offering to the earth in the same way that a mother delivers a child. Her first impulse to develop these amazing ways of building community was from her despair. Her despair was her teacher. And coming together in our despair activates our unprecedented leadership and points us, each of us uniquely and individually, in the direction of our sacred activism. Women know about dependent co-arising from the ecstatic miracle of birth. In fact, one could date the colonialism of feminine wisdom in Western culture to the moment that birth was industrialized. I know it precedes that, but that's as good a marker as any. Interbeing is indigenous to women, and we see this clearly in the leadership of Jacinda Ardern, who took her stride as Prime Minister of New Zealand at the same time as she became a mother and who was able to balance the priorities of human health appropriately alongside economic stability. Unprecedented leadership looks like Jacinda Ardern. It looks like Joanna Macy. It looks like Vandana Shiva. It is compassion in action, articulate and aligned with the fecundity of the forest. It is unafraid of vulnerability. And I have chosen to stand fully in it. Emotional, curious, responsive, unpredictable, and open-heartedly out of control. After years as a clinician, which was always an awkward moniker for me, who is attempting in that role to match a patriarchal model already proven to be fruitless, I take this opportunity to liberate myself completely, here and now, from that attempt. Right now, I'm going to take advantage of my position here. I defy the juggernaut of suicide that is the extractive male directive. And I head into the forest of sacred feminine activism and unprecedented leadership, wildly unifying, wildly untying the ropes of colonialism as I do so. Unifying the tribal members while I untie the ropes of colonialism, even when they are swung by the lasso artists in the environmental and spiritual communities, because they're there also. Those ropes of colonialism are there in spiritual communities, in environmental communities. Those also must be untied. From my perspective, the responsibility of Buddhist caregivers, to use the phrase of John Lewis, who made his last trip across the Edmund Pettus Bridge today, is to cause necessary trouble. The responsibility of Buddhist caregivers, like my friend John, who I think is pretty good at this, is to cause necessary trouble. I encourage Buddhist caregivers to support inner climate transformation, to awaken voices for our living earth. I encourage Buddhist caregivers to emphasize unity and a unified field of consciousness above specific Buddhist practices, to emphasize interbeing as a somatic experience rather than a philosophical tenet, to speak in languages that everyone can understand rather than the lingo known only to Buddhists, to advocate for Black Lives Matter, for Indigenous and feminine leadership, and for the delivery of compassionate care in health and healing in community, including within the ranks of Buddhism itself. There's healing that needs to be done within the ranks of Buddhism itself. I call for Buddhist caregivers to listen to the collective voice, to promote somatic tracking, and to displace authoritarian, patriarchal leadership with respect for the collaborative will. Most importantly, I call on Buddhist caregivers themselves to be voices for our living earth. And to see this pandemic and our existential threat as a factor of the brutal degradation of our mother. She is the sacred activist. She is the unprecedented leader we must listen to and follow. And she is our kin, woven into the sinews of our bodies as a primordial force that speaks to us somatically. She is our homeland. And at this moment of crisis and awakening, she is our only healing, our only health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I have tons of emotion going on, but I'm good at not showing it because I'm from Texas and that's my skill.
Oh, forgive you. Wow, I can only say wow. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Please, yes, please.
You're first.
Oh, well, I was gonna, the only thing I was thinking was I'd like Lourdes to speak now, so please go ahead.
Definitely, this really touched me deeply. Somehow we have some kind of connection. I felt it the moment I saw you. First of all, we have a common ancestor in Trangul Rinpoche. He was the, I don't know if I mentioned it, but he was the teacher of my refuge Lama, Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche, who died very young. And he sort of inherited me. And I gave him a lot of trouble, but he was always kind and compassionate. I consider him one of my living ancestors. The other thing that you touched upon is something that I don't talk very much around here. Where I live at Pilgrim Place, I have a few little issues. And one of the issues is that I've always had a strong connection with plants. Since I was a child, not only did I hear plants, but my grandmother on my father's side, my paternal grandmother, was Maya. And my biological mother died in childbirth, and my milk mother was Igbo Yoruba. So they were very connected to the earth. And since I was a child, literally, they would tell me, when you're sad, just embrace palm trees and then listen to their hearts. And I tell my partners, sometimes I go outside here and embrace trees, and I'm sure that the residents here are probably thinking, we thought she was crazy, but this is crazier than we thought. And it's really interesting because I've been involved now in some community gardens. And one of the community gardens that I've been relating to while I was on the board and things like that, had this kind of problem. And they, of course, growing things, and they sort of attributed that to, poor soil and all this kind of thing, which of course has it's an impact. My father was an agronomist, so I know a little bit about that. But one of the things that I think changed, and I don't think they really have attributed it to this, is that one day during the Days of the Dead, they did a very huge ancestor altar. And when I came into that community garden that day, I could feel it different. And so I started talking to the plants, of course, where some people couldn't see me. And it was like, there was an energy there that I had not felt before. And I think this is really important, this plant-human communication. And there's a big debate in Buddhism about whether plants have consciousness or not. And in the early Pali teachings, there were many people, many commentators on those sutras and so forth, that talked about the consciousness of plants. And now, again, the whole there's a resurfacing of these things where plants don't have consciousness. And when you ask teachers why they are saying that, oh, well, then because people then will not eat plants and all this kind of thing. But I think the consciousness of plants is something that we need to begin talking about. And there is, even in science, a lot of work now on the neurology of plants and so forth. And so we even have the quote unquote science to back some of these indigenous traditions. And then what you said, you know, I know Joanna Macy not very, very well, but we were retreat partners in Northern California for a couple of retreats. And this whole notion of despair as a teacher, I think it's really important now with so many people feeling the despair. And I think that that needs to be talked about. But the final thing you addressed, which is the whole kind of two things. One is the lingo. We need, in some cases, to talk about in terms of science and everything, but we need to get out from some of the academies to talk to other communities. And I think, Alane, you do this very well. You sort of go from talking in quote unquote scientific terms to various communities, and I can only applaud you. You do this much better than I've ever done it. But the other thing is, I think this afternoon, I talked about including in this Buddhist care and counseling organization, the Bon tradition, because that is the pre-Buddhist tradition. And, you know, Buddhists have suppressed those teachings, have incorporated, you know, I've had arguments with some of my Buddhist teachers about this. And I studied with Bon teachers in India. And so when I would go back to some of my teachers, well, why are you studying that? The only one who really encouraged me to study with the Bon teachers at the time was His Holiness Dalai Lama, who said, yes, you go and study with the Bon, just don't mention it around here, okay? And so, but also when I heard Frank speak and having Alane here, I really think this organization should be more the Association of Contemplative or Compassionate Caregivers, care and counseling, rather than the Buddhist stuff. I find that like, you know, I wear that straitjacket in my monastery, trust me. And, you know, the lamas are very patient with me because I bring this and that, and they were wondering, where is she going now? But I find it somewhat constraining, but Stephanie, thank you very much. And I don't know where you are. Are you in California somewhere? I feel like taking a car and going and seeing.
I'm in Oregon, and I would love to continue, of course, with you, Lourdes. I felt it also from the moment that I heard you speak, and I feel that we have some necessary trouble to make together.
Good trouble, like John.
Yeah.
So we're in Oregon. We're in Oregon.
I am out in the countryside. I am not in Portland, and I'm not going to Portland these days, but I am maybe 30, 40 minutes from Portland, depending on the traffic, could be less, but I can see Mount Hood. I'm on the Sandy River. I'm in a beautiful forested area, and that is the forest that I am going to every day, and where many of these experiences are happening. The ancient trees and the birds that proliferate there, both proliferate there, are my companions in this time of alchemy. And if there's time while we're together, I'll read a poem that I wrote just the other day that is really about this unified field of consciousness that I feel is calling us now, that we don't have time to talk lingo that only a few people understand, and that the saving grace for humanity is in the margins that are coming together, the voices, the groundswell. Groundswell is the name of a leadership program that I've developed through Climate Change and Consciousness. And this is leadership that is based on removing the obstacles from your path. It's not based on teaching you, good jokes to tell at the beginning of your speech. It's not about behaving in a certain way. It's about fulfilling your entelechy, your essential self, and the somatic changes. It's a healthcare method. You become healthier as you step more into purposefulness. The changes in your neurochemistry, the changes in your endocrine system match the changes in your consciousness. And it doesn't mean it's a cure-all, but it is a radical step into the resilience that, as I said, is a biological imperative that has urgency at this time. So I look for all the ways in which I can collaborate with you, Lourdes and John.
Okay, now I have some words.
Sorry, John.
No. I needed that time just to integrate. So what I want to do is just show you some pictures of my gurus. And this idea, one reason why I was thinking Buddhist association was so we can get around whatever psychology licenses and stuff. So it was like a strategic idea. But now that Stephanie has liberated us from thinking in those terms, we don't have to react. We can act instead of react. So anyway, so I just wanted to see if you can see. So that's Mother Mira, and so I met her in Germany after college in the summer. So she's my first. Well, I met Amity before that, but I felt a deeper connection with Mother Mira, so that's why I have her in the center. And then I became a monk with Thich Nhat Hanh, and then that one thing led to another, and I got interested in Ramana Maharishi's teachings. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up in India with Lakshmana Swami and Sarada Ma, who Lakshmana Swami was, he's still alive, but he's a disciple of Ramana, and then Sarada Ma is a disciple of Lakshmana Swami. And her awakening path was a bhakti path, a devotion path. She had devotion for Lakshmana Swami. So Lakshmana Swami adopted her basically as his daughter. And her awakening experience, she describes being with Lakshmana Swami, and then she had some intense pain in her head, and so then she kneeled down and put Lakshmana Swami's foot on her head, and then that caused the realization to happen. And Lakshmana Swami was saying, oh yeah, what was happening was that her soul was resisting awakening because the ego wanted to hold on and not let go. And so actually it was her, whatever we want to call it, like her soul was trying to leave her body to avoid having to let go of the ego. And so then it was through her loving relationship with her guru, not in a hierarchical power way, but just through genuine love, that's what the experience brought about the awakening. So I like using Buddhism because in the US, I think people are familiar with it or comfortable with it, and they, I don't know, provide some kind of terms that it's easy to explain what I do if I just say I'm a Buddhist. If I say, well, it's complicated, I'm more than one thing, then, but
No, I
that's a,
understand that, John.
say again?
I understand that.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, so I'm just enjoying letting go of that. That feels very good to let go.
Well, from a pragmatic perspective of things we've talked about, of getting around the licensing and things, it could be an association of contemplative or compassionate care and counseling, and they have a Buddhist track, you know, for certificate of completion, whatever that kind of thing. I just feel that at this, particularly at this time, I've always felt this, but particularly at this time of broadening of things, and you know, we have the collapse literally of empire, and the resurgence of other modes of not being and of structures that, you know, some of them are old structures that have been suppressed, and others are new and innovative structures, that to have a bigger umbrella, you know. I was thinking, you know, about the talk of Frank and like I said, seeing Alane here and others that we both know, to bring them in. And I think that just the Buddhist thing would be too tight, too constraining, but I'm open to anything.
There are some people who are turned away by the word Buddhist, who would be not magnetized and who might have contributions to make, for instance, from Christianity. So a more embracing name could be more useful. It's definitely worth collaborating about and letting people be with the potential possibility.
Alane, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think I like the term. I mean, I totally understand your reasoning and your thought process, John. And at the same time, I think broadening it out. So people come into, you say a word, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or anything, and people automatically jump to some kind of even somatic response, right? They don't even realize what the cognitive response is, and that may be limiting. It may be kind of putting up some kind of wall. So how do we figure out what kind of inclusive language, and people aren't even going to have that embodied resistance to? We want people to be open to that. And yeah, so I just think that we have so much baggage around certain religiosity, and sometimes people don't even know what it is, right? They don't even know why they might have a response to somebody that says something Christian, or somebody that says something that's, you know, uses Buddhism or whatever it is. And so I think trying to have inclusive language around that is really important. And absolutely, totally understand your reasoning, John, and so how can we work around that? And Lourdes, I really liked your idea of that, you know, having kind of a Buddhism tract, right? So it gets included and it gets acknowledged, and yet isn't a limiting factor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saying at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings and the Council of Elrond, and you have elves and dwarves and hobbits and humans and yeah, the different traditions coming together.
Right.
So Alane, I know we had asked you also to respond to Stephanie. So I'm wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much. That was just beautiful. And one of the things that I was thinking about, not just thinking about, but really experiencing as you were talking is, you know, I am a very embodied person, and I respond. Sometimes I can't even articulate what I know, and what I know because it's an embodied sense. And one of the things that was hitting me when you were talking is like, you know that, right? You know that because it's an embodied experience, and to be able to honor that is so important. And so I'm so grateful for so much of what you said. And I want to kind of break it down and get a little bit deeper into it, but I just want to kind of throw that out there as we begin. And John, thank you for putting this all together and getting us all together. This has been, you know, a wonderful process, and these conversations and just being able to make these connections and network. And you're right. I think hooking Stephanie and I up was a really good intuitive insight there. And, you know, Lourdes, you have my heart. Every time I even see you say your name, my heart opens. And, you know, someday you guys may hear the story of how Lourdes and I came together, but there's no doubt that there was the universe orchestrating our connection, because there's no way it could have happened otherwise. I mean, actually our first communication was, I just had this impulse to write this woman a letter. I had no intention of going to CGU, and my first line in the letter was, you probably think I'm crazy, but my intuition is telling me to write you this letter, you know. And of course Lourdes reads that and go, of course, you know. So anyway, Lourdes, you have my heart all the time.
And you have mine, you know that.
Yeah. So, so Stephanie, just so much of what you said really resonated. And what is unprecedented leadership? Unprecedented leadership really is the ability to be able to go within and let that lead. But how do we do that, right? How do we do that? Because so much of us, you know, we're so used to going outside for answers, or trying to find, even when you compare that to other activism that doesn't work, right? That's not inner activism. It's not inner led. It's this grabbing, and it doesn't work. And it becomes more toxic, and the harder we push. So we need to be able to cultivate this inner landscape. And then how do you begin to do that? So one of the things I'd like to do, John, if it's okay to play, I just have a real short YouTube video put together of a talk that I gave at the Dhammakaya International Meditation Center, and it was on a full moon. They have full moon meditations, and so it was their very first full moon meditation. So it was kind of a big event, and they had asked me to give a little talk before it, and it kind of encapsulates, right, what I kind of think about as far as the first step. And then I'm going to go on and kind of more address some of the things that how I think it ties together with a lot of the things that you said so eloquently, and also so beautifully, because you could tell that it's a known experience, right? I mean, you know when somebody's speaking their truth, because it's a whole somatic felt thing. And I don't think that people that haven't felt that before understand that. It sounds crazy to other people, right? And so how do we begin to teach people to have their own experiences so they know it, right? There's a difference between thinking in your head and really knowing. So John, I don't know if you wanted, can you pull that up?
Sure.
Or?
Yeah. Oops. Okay, hold on a second. I'll take just a moment. So.
As we gather under the full moon tonight to meditate together, I am struck by the powerful metaphor of illumination. That the simple process of being quiet and going within may paradoxically light up your life's path in a way that would never be possible if you were looking externally for the answers and trying to figure it all out. It is has led me to entertain the possibility that, number one, this present and immediate moment may be the most important there is, and that your full and deep presence in it may be the greatest gift you can give. And if you were able to live every moment from that reality, that your life would light up in a way that would never be possible otherwise. So it's reminded me of kind of three conversations I've had lately. One with my very dear friend, Sid, when we were thinking about aging, because aging has been on my mind a lot lately. And one of the things that hit me was like, what if this is it? What if this is it? In our culture, in our minds, we're always trying to do more and be more and get somewhere and add more things on and just putting all these things on ourselves over and over and over again instead of just being in the very moment that we're in. And maybe what it's really all about is the accumulation of all the moments of our lives and the presence that we bring to them. So it's led me to a lot of what ifs. What if this moment is it? And then what if we could live our lives as every moment was it? And what if we could bring a certain type of presence into those moments? So then that leads me, so how do we do that? And then another conversation that really struck me is we have a young lab assistant, Megan, who's just so excited about this book about tidying up your life. And it really is about really letting go of all of the things in your life that it doesn't give you joy, that doesn't hit that core of who you are.
We've lost the sound, John.
Beautiful sculptures of all time. And so, you know, he's been asked often and often, how do you do that? How do you take a chunk of marble and how do you mold something as beautiful as the statue of David? And what he answered was, I don't mold the statue of David. I chip away everything that isn't David, and David begins to appear. And for me, that's the key of how we bring into our presence, is chipping away everything that we aren't. And then what appears is who we're meant to be. And meditation is one of those things that really begins to help us chip away at the things that we aren't. So then when we become these statues or our own versions of the statues of David, how do we begin to keep that and cultivate that and keep ever deepening? And one of the stories that is important to me in my life is when I first went on my own spiritual journey many, many years ago. I just threw myself into it absolutely wholeheartedly and reading everything I could. And one of the very first things I picked up was a book. And the very first line of this book was, "You have been facing the wrong way." And those 7 words absolutely changed my life. Because that's life, right? We're so used to thinking about all the external world. We're responding to the external world like that's the cause and we're the effect, rather than the other way around. And we're so busy just kind of responding and doing and being and looking outward. And it's like, wow, maybe life is really about taking that about face and about looking within instead of looking without. And so which brings me up to another conversation that's really struck me lately. We have some pretty meaningful conversations in my lab these days. and my lab assistant Justin, who is here tonight. And we were talking, and I don't know if it was something that you read or, but it was kind of like, who am I? At the end of the day, when everything else is stripped away and I'm alone with myself, if I can ask that question, who am I? And really be honest about who that person I'm becoming is, and that again is led to by a path of meditation. And at the end of the day, if we can honestly ask, who am I really? Who am I really? And be able to look deeply at that, and then come full circle and bring that person, that chipped away statue of David, that we're really focused on who am I really, and bring that sense of presence into every moment. What our world could be, what we could be. That, my friends, is the only way that we will ever find inner peace, and we will ever find world peace. And that's how our path gets lighted. We think we have this path or trajectory in our life, and really what that path is, possibly questioning, is just having the illumination of every step of the way by our full presence of each moment. And I just think it's so fitting to have the full moon tonight. If we can just take a moment and look up at the full moon and have that remind us that the fuller the presence that we can bring to every moment, the more our path will just naturally be illuminated of exactly who we are and who we're supposed to be in this world. And so that's the invitation, or that's my invitation to you tonight. Thank you.
Okay, just like I'll unmute everybody.
Okay, so then your assignments for this week, you are going to spend some time watching videos.
It's a different
Oh, sorry,
video.
hold on a second. I'll mute myself.
So, so Stephanie, again, I feel like we speak such the same language at such a deep level. So then to me, it even goes way far beyond what that video was about, right? Then it also becomes into really understanding, not just understanding, but living what the whole mind-body connection is about, right? Because even in some of our traditions that hail meditation still have this dichotomy, right? That the mind and body are separate. All, you know, in so many of our religious traditions, the body is bad, or it's something to be, you know, transcended, or, you know, we have, you know, our mind is one thing and our spirit is one thing, but our body is this totally different thing. And, or even if, you know, even some traditions that, you know, will embrace the body, it's like we've got these just brains, right? These brains, and then the body is just this thing that carries the brain around from our shoulders to our toes. And to be able to really embrace what the human system that we live in facilitates our experience. It facilitates our experience, right? And even spiritual experience. And I'm not saying that's where it comes from, but I'm saying as long as we are in our human bodies, as long as we're, you know, being housed in our human bodies are what are facilitating these experiences. And so being able to understand that, then is what enables us to cultivate the capacity for more of the same. And that's what I love so much about your work, and where I feel like we really, really connect together, is that's possible. And it's not only possible, but when we live our lives the way people typically live their lives, they're doing exactly the opposite. because we live our lives through so much trauma, and it gets carried and it gets stored, and we're constantly carrying it in our bodies and our brains, and we don't even realize it, and we're functioning from that place. So how do we begin to then embrace the whole connection that the mind, body, and spirit are one being, and be able to really heal deeply at the somatic level, you know, and in a holistic, where it is a whole mind, body, spirit healing. And then that's what opens us up, right? That's what's opens us up for that leadership, for that inner knowing, for that inner healing, because we can't be the receivers of the universal knowledge or the universal truth if we're all cluttered ourselves. If our mind is cluttered, if our bodies are cluttered, if we haven't done the healing, we can't hear that, right? We can't be that leader that you're talking about. We can't be that embodied person that can really be vulnerable to life and let life lead the way it's supposed to lead and get out of the way, right? So to be able to really embrace what that means. And then even, you know, I think it's so beautiful that you've taken that even a step further and saying, okay, so this is actually a process that we can do. Look at, there are ways, right? There are very specific ways that we can look at that healing, and we can create these vehicles of transformation in our own mind-body complex, where we are the conduits, right? The healing can't happen without us being the conduits to be able to make it happen. And
absolutely,
so,
yeah, that's completely correct physiologically. And, you know, this to me gets right back to what it is that you're doing together. You know, what is the nature of contemplative care? What is the nature of Buddhist or compassionate care? And from my experience as a person who has focused on the treatment of trauma, you know, the first area of my first book was on the experience and resolution and transformation of sexual trauma. And the nature of trauma and the nature of this juggernaut, this suicidal juggernaut that we're all trying to disconnect from, to move on to an entirely more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. The nature of that juggernaut, the nature of trauma, is to fragment us,
right,
is to disempower us and not allow that mind-body connection. So for me, compassionate care, this is what I do with people. This is what I'm doing now in leadership groups that I'm facilitating, is to compassionately meet each person there, not to deliver lingo or theory, but to compassionately meet each person there and help them identify, to the best of my ability, those obstacles in their path that are keeping them in a fragmented state.
right. And then that reintegrates their whole being, right? Yeah.
And all that's why I love these subtle interventions coupled with, it's not the only thing I teach. Holding these sites begins to generate, to stir the soup of plasticity. But it's in, first of all, it's in the nature of the relationship. It's in the way I'm present and listening to the person. And it's the way that I understand from a neuropsychological standpoint what has happened to their brain development as a result of the traumas they've experienced, the overwhelming shocks they've experienced at critical stages of their development, and then repatterning, revisiting in very gentle, non-cathartic ways those sites of fragmentation, and inviting a way to differentiate the past from the present,
Right.
inviting a way to step into the neurological potential for revisiting those broken moments, those moments of complete destruction. And for one thing, seeing how we compensated for those moments. Because the ways that we compensated for those moments at various stages became our habituated traumatic repetition that we are now fueling ourselves. Nobody's doing it to us. We're doing it to ourselves. Disengaging that mechanism for each individual. My greatest passion is really working individually with people. You know, I have to work collectively because it's more efficient. But my joy is in assisting someone in doing that very delicate reorganization of synaptic firings and seeing that there's an alternative route.
Right.
And
right.
then solidifying that alternative route.
Right.
There's enormous excitement in that, and you don't have to be trained in anything in order to do that, you know. And I have a great passion for working at the grassroots level. That's really where my heart is. And I've created this paradigm called sustainable health, which is, I think, perhaps has some resonance with what you're doing with compassionate care or Buddhist care, which is providing a community context for healing from trauma at the grassroots level. There, you don't have to bring in anybody with any letters after their names, you know. You are able to actually implement that transformation individually and in community. And I call that sustainable health. I probably have to find a better name, but it's what's working right now. And that sustainable health is an easily understandable language and is also inclusive of the culture in which that community or that individual exists. It includes, I have a film that is going to be ready any minute now. It's so close, that depicts this. And it includes the music of that culture. It includes the mythology of that culture. And it allows each individual to very consciously and proactively and in a repetitive way repattern these compensatory mechanisms that keep us stuck, that thwart that entelechy, that unified consciousness, and allow it to physiologically be experienced individually. And then of course that affects the whole collective when it happens. And it's through that process that we are revolutionaries, you know, and that we counter this intentional aim of this society to disempower us, to keep us fragmented. And so this is the way I come from, a background of taking, as I indicated, some pretty drastic action for a revolution that I thought had to happen then and is happening, I think, in other ways now. And I learned from that doesn't work. I learned from that, as you're saying, Alane, it's an inner climate revolution that springs up then of its own accord. That's the beautiful piece. We don't determine the outcome. It doesn't have to look like anything that we already know. There's no picture of it. It doesn't look like this one or that one, you know? That's the unprecedented nature of it. We don't know what kind of leadership is going to spring out of this awakening, this inner liberation. And it's promoting that inner liberation. That's what I was getting to as the nature of the responsibility that I see of compassionate care, of Buddhist caregiving. And, you know, I am not in this completely neutral state because I have this intention that this leadership will be a voice for our living earth. So I can't call myself a psychotherapist because I have a particular goal in mind, which is a chorus, a global chorus of voices for our living earth.
Yes, thank you.
I think one of the challenges, and I say this as somebody who, although I come from all these backgrounds, I mean, literally, all my closest ancestors were people who were fleeing from someone else and some other oppression. You know, my paternal grandmother was Maya. My paternal grandfather was a crypto Jew, you know, and my mother's parents, my grandparents, were fleeing from the Russian Revolution. They were with Mongolian ancestry. And so, and still I feel privileged because of certain, you know, the degrees, you know, all these kinds of things. So how can we, I've always thought about this, how can I walk into the academy with a PhD, but not walk my privilege? You know, how can I, you know, walk somewhere, you know, like in the charnel grounds of the US-Mexico border and not exude the privilege that even if I'm here, I'm not from here. My migration is way behind me. And it's because we in walking, we are recreating colonialism, we're recreating empire. It doesn't mean that there are no structures of power and things like that, but we recreate those conditions. And whether we're white, brown, black, red, whatever. And so the task is one of learning to walk without recreating those patterns. It's a repatterning.
Beautiful.
I'm wondering, Alane, just because I know when you've come to the Kleinbill Institute and we're sharing the heart math with us. So I'm interested in hearing more about your experience of your heart, like how you somatically experience your heart as a source for this compassion and wisdom and healing. I just have I haven't heard you specifically say anything about it, but I just have a feeling that maybe you would have something to say about that.
Oh yeah, no, for me, it was always, you know, when all the stuff first started coming out about contemplative practice and neuroscience, it was all about the brain, and it was all white guys talking about the brain. And I felt that didn't speak to my experience. And my spiritual experience was a very embodied one, and it was based in love, and it was a whole-bodied experience. And I had been so interested before I kind of went on my whole spiritual journey. I was into just physiology, and I was fascinated with the heart, and I was on my way to get my PhD in public health at Loma Linda until I met Lourdes. But
Everything went out the window.
But it all of a sudden everything made sense to me. It was like this thing that I feel and this thing that I know, and then there was a physiological explanation of what, you know, because I know what system integration feels like. And I know that this is what I was trying to say earlier to Stephanie. I know when my system is integrated, that's when I'm in my deepest being, and that's when I'm most connected to the universe. And for me, it's a very heart-led thing. It's a metaphorical heart-led thing, but then also when we can actually look at the physicality of what's going on, you know, and it's all connected, right? The heart rate variability is, you know, it's an electrical impulse, right? Electricity, we can measure your electrical impulse from your heart away from your body now, right? We've been able to do it for over 100 years at the level of our skin. When you do an EKG, I could take you to my lab and just put things on your wrists and your ankles, and we could measure an EKG easy. I mean, the electrical impulse is that strong, and our bodies are fluid. And so whatever's going on with the electrical impulse of our heart, and it's making patterns, and that pattern is reflecting how we're feeling. It's reflecting our system integration, and it's all connected to our biochemistry and our neural patterns. It's all, it's all connected in our bodies, but the heart has a big piece to do with it. And so for me, it was just fascinating being able to look at that, and fascinating being able to look at, I love oxytocin too. I'm a real heart person, and I'm really, I love love, right? and so when you're in certain heart wave patterns, how your oxytocin levels are up, and how when you're in a certain heart wave pattern that other people around you fall into sync with that. I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. And to be able to, I use a lot of my lab to just be able to train people, because you can do it easily from what I was talking earlier about, it was an EKG, but you can actually do it just from a pulse sense monitor. So what the HeartMath does, right, is it's training people to kind of be physically and trained, physiologically and trained. And you don't need the computer to do it, right? But it reflects what's going on. And so it really helps people when they can look at the computer and it's showing the heart rate variability, and they can kind of sense how they feel. It's like, oh, okay, that's what it feels like when my system is integrated. And so it's a really simple tool to kind of be able to train people to get into that place of system integration, right? And again, it's all connected. In my books, I write how it's all connected to our biochemistry, and it's all connected to our neural patterns and all of that. So it's not just the heart rate variability by itself, but it's a really beautiful, useful tool. And for me, it just spoke to my truth, right? Because it wasn't all about the brain. It was inclusive of the body. It was using the heart as a center. And, it's kind of, we have memory systems through our whole body. This is a lot of what Stephanie's work is about as well, right? We have memory systems through our whole body. It might not be a cognitive memory, but we have cellular memory through our whole body. And so when we can begin to repattern, I mean, that's what we've been talking about, right? The plasticity, the repatterning. And so when we can kind of work from that repatterning, both from the physical and the metaphorical heart, it's just, it's just a whole different way of than just trying to be mindful, right? And I love, I know that in Asian cultures, right, mindfulness does include the heart. Unfortunately, the way we've westernized it, it's become this whole brain mindful thing that just forgets love and compassion. And, so I'm really into embracing. Most of my work is really about embracing love, embracing self-empathy and compassion, and doing the healing that way. When Lourdes was talking about memory reconsolidation, how do you do that from self-love and self-compassion and give yourself a different story? Entertain the difficult story enough, but then bring in a different story, bring in a healing story, right? So for me, it's just all connected, but the heart piece is huge because it brought it down to a different system in my body. And again, this is just kind of what I started with talking about with Stephanie's work, was like, it when you feel it. And that was such a truth for me, to bring it down to the heart space and really be to look at and then validate with some of the science behind it and what's going on. And, because that people listen to that, right? It's like, oh, okay, there's some science behind this. So I want to start looking, and it's validating stuff,
Something that I did not mention when I presented the other day is that in the memory reconsolidation work that I did with Olivia, the Jamaican woman, I utilized the middle son drew very well, and I asked him to draw a beautiful picture of his mother, and that she was very nicely, and he did a wonder. I mean, the kid is an artist. I hope he has developed this. And it was very healing for her to see her second son draw her in a very beautiful manner. That was one of the ways of counteracting her memory of her being dirty and all this kind of thing. It was just very powerful. So that's one thing. So I totally agree with you. I must say that Alane in particular, and then there were other students who brought in how the hard math came into the education department is a long story. I was traveling in Northern California and I saw something that said Institute of Hard Math. And my partner said, "Where are you going?" I turned around and went there. We were driving somewhere else. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I want to find out what this is all about." So I got in there. There were all these buildings and nobody was around. And then somebody came out and I said, "Are you doing something here about the heart?" "Oh, yes, come in. We'll let you." Well, anyway, so so we wrote a grant together. And of course, the Department of Education was wondering what I was going to do with all this. But the moment we got the grant, they were, "Oh, yes, of course." So Alane was the pioneer. She was the person who said, "Okay, I'm going to do this." And she had her background in science and everything. And everybody in the department was saying, "What are they doing?" You know, this was a Department of Education. So how many, you went to how many schools? I don't remember, 100 and something schools, and started measuring the heart variability of the teachers and what was the impact when they came into the classroom. And at the time, the Dean of Education was a very close friend of mine and a friend of Alane. And he would say to me, "I hope this works," because if not, we're all going to be in trouble. And so several of the students, actually under the leadership of Alane more than mine, you know, did I think a wonderful study, you know, of heart variability.
1,600 kids, school kids go through that training.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think,
But we never
Like,
got to the yogurt.
Huh?
Remember the yogurt? We were always threatening that we were going to put yogurt cultures in the teachers' classrooms to see how toxic it was because the cultures would die.
Yeah. Well, and we wanted to put the yogurt, yeah, there was a very problematic person in the department who was saying what she's doing, meaning me, is just crazy and she's crazy and all this kind of thing. So I threatened to put yogurt in both our offices, and which yogurt lasted longer than the other and didn't work. Anyway, it was fun.
yes, I'm remembering when I was in college and I was working with Stephanie, and then that's when I was also learning how to meditate. And so I felt like one of the main lessons was just learning how to come down into my body and be able to let go of identifying with the conceptual mind. And so then I was doing the Japanese Zen practice where I focus on the hara or tantien. And so I felt like just the repeated practice of aware of the breathing and focusing in that place over and over again, a sort of organic letting go of the conceptual mind and dropping down into the intuitive. And then over time, then that also led to just experience of being itself or awareness itself. And then that tended to be more in the heart center where I experienced that. And so for me, learning from Buddhism, Taoism, where the word, it's heart mind, it's not mind. So we don't have the word in English.
That's the issue with the mindfulness movement, that people think it's here.
Right.
And so then what I'm realizing is, yeah, it's a whole way that we're mapping our body and mind, and then the subtle energy and the experience of Shen or heart mind. So I feel like it's like we have to do a whole education process to have this more embodied way of mapping what it is that we're experiencing.
Right, and our traditions for thousands of years have talked about the heart center, you know, and so what I love about the research around the physiology of the heart in its context of emotion, rather than just being this pump thing that we have in our body, is that it's kind of, you know, it's just hooking up and not that it needs the validation, but really is validating what we've always known to be true. And it's like, yeah, okay, so there is this is a really important center in our body, and it really does carry this energy, and it does carry the energy surrounding us and surrounding the people around us. And we get enough people in that collective energy, and we get, you know, a level of coherence that's a group coherence level, and you know, in embracing this kind of collective energy can get into that tipping point. And it's, yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that has captivated me in my work with trauma, and also in my work as a neuroscientist, is understanding the development, human development, and the development of the brain. And the tissue that forms the brain actually evolves out of the heart. Looks like John has his heart center opening up right now. And it's important to realize that they are one and the same, really. They evolve out of the same connective tissue. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that not everybody has a great experience when they tap into their body. So as I mentioned, my first focus was really on the treatment of sexual trauma. And it was really the first place that I was orienting in terms of my own healing as well. And as someone who was studying Buddhism at the same time that I was trying to resolve the sexual trauma in my life, I was not comfortable coming into my body. I was not comfortable with just breathing in my body. It was incredibly distressing for me. And that's why I so adore the non-formulaic approaches that really emphasize being with the person first before you have any ideas or any interventions, and coming into the relationship with that intention to be curious about the person, which I felt really informed the case studies that Lourdes presented. In one of my training manuals for the TAR approach, where we use a pulse listening methodology, which is the Oriental equivalent, I guess, of the heart monitors. There's this beautiful story, which was reported by a Western physician, Dr. Richard Selzer, when Yeshe Dundon, who's now an ancestor, when he was doing grand rounds at Harvard Medical School. You know the story, Lourdes?
Yes, I know. He was my doctor in Dharamsala, so anyway.
Oh, yeah. Blessed. He is going to do an assessment of a woman who has a very complex heart condition. And Richard Selzer was an intern at that time in the hall where all the interns were. And as Yeshe Dundon is approaching the patient, Richard Selzer is observing the transformation in the patient, just as Yeshe Dundon is approaching her. And he observes that her color changes, that she becomes upright, that she suddenly looks vital and present and relieved as he comes closer to her. And Yeshe Dundon does his assessment, which of course matches the diagnostics, but goes far beyond the diagnostics, pointing to the prenatal period at which this woman's heart suffered a malfunction. Mm-hmm. But the woman has received the greatest healing from all the years that she has been in the care of Western medicine. The healing she received was being approached by somebody who really cared and was curious and had prepared himself all morning long for this assessment. He had prayed, he had examined himself, he had showered, he had bathed, and so had everybody in his retinue. He had done his practices so that he could be clear to make this assessment, and she could feel that. And to me, that's compassionate care, that the practitioner is fully curious, fully present to this individual, that their precious life and the obstacles that they faced are of great importance to that practitioner. So I wanted to share that as we were speaking of the heart, and we're speaking of the role of the heart in one's entire response to defragmenting the body.
No, he was there. He was His Holiness Dalai Lama's doctor, but he attended to some of us who got sick. I in particular ate the wrong cauliflower, and I was quite sick. And so I was ushered into the Mekong place, and there he was. I didn't know he was. It was an amazing experience. But the more amazing experience is also that the medications that they use, prayed over, have been picked in a particular way. The plants have been asked to collaborate, you know, with the healing. I mean, it's totally different. And this is why I like this place that I mentioned today in Topanga Canyon. Dr. Nida Chetnat-san, he's a Nakpa, and he has a healing garden there, and he is training young Tibetan medical doctors, not necessarily Tibetan, but ethnically, but everybody in Tibetan medicine. And they're praying a lot on this garden and making those medications in that way. And I think we should make some kind of connection with these people. I mean, it's really amazing.
That's a beautiful idea. And in many traditions, the plant medicines are used with this orientation. Corinne, who is probably off the call now, but she was calling in from New Zealand. She's training in Rongwa, which is this plant medicine that involves communication with the plants. So that, again, and we are actually speaking about the heart, about the resonance of the heart, because when you feel that resonance, when you feel that connection with the interventions themselves, whether they're human or plant, then there is a physiological neurochemical response that amplifies the healing potential that is available to us at any moment. And that has to be integral, I believe, to compassionate care.
What is the name of that plant medicine training program that she's involved?
Well, no, it is Rongwa, is Maori plant medicine. Rongwa.
Maori plant medicine.
It's Maori plant medicine, yes. It's in the Maori wisdom tradition.
So I just wanted to go back what you're saying, Stephanie, about like I remember, like I haven't had any big major traumas in my life, but yeah, just trying to get into my body, there was all kinds of pain, anxiety, sorrow that came out, as you well know, because that's why we were. So I feel like, yeah, that needs to be part of the understanding that getting into your body is not easy. It's yeah, it's a rough ride, but it's doable, and it can be made less scary. I don't know. I don't think there's any way to avoid pain altogether, but and I mean, it could be that maybe it was from birth experiences, or who knows, past lives, or also just like culturally because of racism, capitalism, genocide, slavery, whatever collective trauma we're all holding in our bodies. So anybody in the society who is coming into their body there's a certain level of violence and pain and suffering that will be gone through. And so I feel like, to me, that process for me was like my true education. And so that, like when you're talking about compensation, I feel like capitalism is just compensation for not being able to be supported to go through that process. And the whole colonialism, capitalism is a compensation of not having the tradition and the collective practice of learning how to be in the body and go through that process.
Well,
Yeah, it's institutionalized disconnection.
but it begins at childbirth. I remember fighting with my OBGYN person who literally they wanted to hook me to all these things in order to, anyway, it's a long story about my deliveries, 2 of them, not one of them, but 2 of them. And we know now, we've known for quite a while what birth trauma does. And we need to address that. And at one point, there was a quote unquote, a lobby to try to address the issues of birth trauma that replicate themselves every day in all our hospitals. You know, I've been talking to a lot of women, young women right now, even my daughter-in-law, and it's just an amazing kind of experience that they go in there and they immediately want them to deliver and get them out, and it's just, and the birth trauma is really, you may not have gone through a birth, you know, through a trauma in your life, but who knows what your mom went through? You never know.
Well, actually, yeah, I do. I was a twin, and when I was a monk, I had this whole experience. I think I want to add in, sometimes celibacy is a good thing, and then being in the present moment can have experiences of awakening or realization that's some even deeper, I don't know how we want to call it, a deeper experience of the present or some other, I don't know, I'm interested in how, when we talk about everyone being in the present moment, but also being aware that, I think that's one issue with the secular mindfulness, is that it doesn't allow for rebirth, it doesn't allow for these transpersonal states of consciousness. And so when I feel like when we talk about embodiment, it includes also these transpersonal levels of awakening. But the documentary of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and there was a young Tibetan filmmaker being interviewed, and he said he had been around many great masters, but Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was different, stood out because not only was he a great master, he was also a very nice guy. So I think
It was huge. I mean,
right, like when I was a monk, after I had already done therapy with Stephanie and had gone through this process of listening to my body, and really, so when I got to the monastery, I had this naive idea that, oh, everyone's going to want to meditate and then talk about their trauma and help each other process their trauma. And it's like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So, yeah, this idea of tradition, but also overturning tradition, I feel like this gets at that, yeah. Okay, so it's almost 9 o'clock. That's our time that was scheduled. And I feel like we've achieved, the goal of the conference for me was to get people together and start talking, and so that they felt so connected that they feel like they have to keep talking. So even if we don't have hundreds of people listening right now, I'm sure the recordings will lead to a lot of people listening to it. But the main goal, I feel like, is us feeling happy and connected with each other and then wanting more. I'm just sharing, I've shared this with all the panels, but I'm sharing it again here, that I really am happy how connected I feel with all of you now, and grateful that all of you feel connected with each other, and that there's an organic, regenerative movement, it feels like, to keep going with this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think you achieved your goal, John.
Yeah.
A lot of work, John. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you too. Okay, so I'll stop the recording.